Hello everyone, it's Steve Barrett here. Welcome to another edition of Coffee Break. Delighted to be here with Anne-Marie Squeo, who's the Chief Comms and Brand Officer at Xerox. And welcome to the show, Anne-Marie. How are you doing?
I'm doing great, Steve. How are you doing?
Yeah, I'm surviving. You know, that's all we can do these days. Are you at home or are you back in the office? What's your back?
I'm actually in the office today.
Okay.
I've been coming in a couple of days a week for the last month or two. It's a good mix of working from home and working in the office, and maybe a sign of what the future holds for most of us.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that's very true. So interesting job title you have, brand and communications. And we always love to talk about people in that role because sometimes those two functions can operate in silos and run along parallel lines. And that's very difficult these days to do that because, you know, especially with social media, you have to be integrated. So tell us about how that came about. You joined from Netflix, I think. What was the sort of?
Actually, I was at IBM before I joined Xerox. Yeah. It's interesting. I think that for Xerox, we are going through a fairly major transformation as the world becomes less reliant on paper and therefore printers. And, how are you going to be relevant in the future? And as you think about embarking on those journeys, you can't have two totally different storylines coming out of the company from communications and marketing. The challenge that my CEO put to me in my job interview was, if you came here, you need to blow the place up. And I think it took me every CEO says that. Most of them don't really mean it. This one did.
That's John Byzantine, yeah?
Yeah. So John did, but I think it took a little time to figure out exactly what that was going to mean when I think about the landscape of the changes that were happening at Xerox and within the industry.
Yeah, so how did you go about that? That's a nice brief to have, isn't it? As a communicator or a marketer, you can come in and say, okay, how would we almost start from scratch here? So how did you go about doing that? And what were the ways in which you did blow up the function and the organization?
Yeah, I mean, it's funny. I actually did start from exactly what you just said. If I were building this organization today, what would I really need and what would I not need as much of? And a lot of it had to do with me just getting out and talking to people. So I would say for the first, 6 months or so, I was having a lot of conversations and asking what most people who've been here 30 years probably thought were pretty dumb questions. But I was trying to figure out what people were doing with their time, how they were helping us grow, where their focus was. And pretty quickly, it became clear that over time and over a series of changes on the team for Xerox, we had become very internally focused. And when I say that, I mean, we were very focused on equipping our sales teams to go out and sell, but we were not focused on building the external positioning and brand for the company that's going to actually make it easier for those salespeople to sell. So there was a very big disconnect between, I guess, what you would call like the top of the funnel and the bottom of the funnel, and the middle of the funnel was almost vacant. So as we did this, what was interesting, what was happening, I was going to the marketing leadership team meetings and the communications leadership team meetings, and everything was a duplicate. I had to meet with the budget people about the marketing budget and then the comms budget. And finally, it just became patently clear that with budget shrinking, with massive change in our company and in our industry, that what I really needed to do was kind of bring these teams together so that they were working on the same things in the same direction and moving that way. And as we did that, which really we didn't start doing that officially until the end of last year, the beginning of this year, and of course then the pandemic happened, and that was sort of the ultimate test. And what was interesting about it was we were able to move so much faster than we would have been able to move if we had still been two totally separate teams, because my leadership team now has everybody represented on it. Marketing's there, digital content is there, integrated marcom is there, employee executive comms are there. They're all there. So they all have a seat at the table and can provide input and develop the plans together. And that's helped us move a lot faster, focus a lot more, and increase consistency. We're by no means there yet, but I would say that the pandemic has probably been the challenge that became an opportunity to drive faster.
Did you, when you were going around that process of talking to people, hear a lot of, well, why did you ask why do we do things like this? And did you get, because that's the way it's always been done, which is it's just the way of organizations, really. And then was there resistance to certain people, or did you have to switch the team around? Did some people buy into it? To talk us, what was the people impact on that and the team impact?
Yeah, I mean, yes to all of that. And as you come, especially when you come in from the outside, there's definitely going to be a period of people are sizing you up. Does this person know what they're talking about? Do they have the influence to actually get this stuff done? And so it took time. In some cases, it took time to get people over the hump and believe. I mean, I remember when we made some changes earlier this year, it was overheard that someone said, well, Emory doesn't care about digital. And I'm like, oh my God, like I care about digital so much. But they didn't see the other shoe that I knew was about to drop, which was we were going to hire this great digital guy from Condé Nast, who has really helped drive our content and our digital strategy forward, right? So I knew the pieces before others did. And so I think there was a good amount of trying to convince people that this was the path forward. There was people who were not going to be convinced, and they're not here anymore. They either self-selected out or were helped in that regard. But I think what I'm starting to see, and it takes time. Whenever you start a new job, it takes time to build the constituency. But what we're starting to see is morale is up. One of the things I heard a lot when I got here is people are crying at their desks all the time, and I was like, well, why? Well, what's going on? Well, it's too much work. Well, and so what did that mean, really? It meant that like we weren't prioritizing the work that we expected people to do. And so they were feeling like they had to do all of this work. They were, what I would call order taking, right? So somebody requested X and we just did it without kind of questioning, okay, well, what is the objective of this exercise? Because maybe there's a different solution that isn't going to require this kind of a time investment. Maybe we already have a solution that we can repurpose for this. So freeing people up to kind of help their teams and help themselves start to prioritize what is really truly important, what is going to move the company's needle. I think that was liberating for a lot of people. And I send like these bi-monthly or monthly notes to the whole team. I call them Friday musings. What I've noticed is that people are sending back responses to Friday musings telling me that they get it. Like they're getting the strategy, they're getting the direction. I'm sure there's still people who don't get it, right? So I'm not in some dream state, but I think we've made a lot of progress, and a lot of that has been the result of the focus that the pandemic brought, and that I had already started bringing to people. Like, don't waste time doing things that don't move the needle, okay? You get tired, we don't really need it. Focus on the things that are going to move the needle, and then you won't be as tired and you'll be energized because you can see the benefits of the work and your blood, sweat, and tears. And so that's been a cultural change that we've had to go through.
Yeah, I was going to ask about that. Obviously, you blow things up, there's wreckage, but also how do you measure the effectiveness, and how does John Byzantine, how has he reacted, and how do you sell the sort of the new structure to him? And so, because he'll presumably be looking for some measurable outcomes from it. How have you done that?
Yeah, I mean, and we have measurable outcomes. I mean, I regularly update him and our executive committee on the revenue we're driving. We were a virtually dataless environment when I got here. We are now pulling across all sources of data to actually hold ourselves accountable. We have a dashboard. John has access to my dashboard. He can see the leads that we're generating for the business. He can comment on them. We can also make sure that the sales leadership team has access to those leads so that they can see what isn't being actioned by their teams and follow up. So we're pulling the string all the way through. And I think that the results are starting to show. I mean, we're hearing increasingly positive feedback from customers who understand that Xerox isn't just there to sell them a printer anymore. And that is a direct result of all the work we've done to bring up the nose, as I like to say, using an airplane reference, on our strategy and how we go to market for the brand. Sometimes you can go to market at the brand level and be so esoteric that people don't know what the action is for them, right? Like, so I'm supposed to call you and ask for what? And I think, the Make Now Work campaign that we rolled out earlier this summer really tried to bucket the areas where we can help businesses thrive, right? So powering up a flexible workforce, personalizing communications, workflow automation. We can work across all those sectors and deliver capabilities to customers that go far beyond the printer, right?
Yeah, because
that in many cases.
Obviously Xerox is uniquely associated with the office, and obviously the office had changed markedly since the company started and evolved. It's evolved incredibly in the last 6.5 months. So 2 questions on that. How are you responding? I guess that campaign is one way, but how do you see the office responding and evolving now? Because, we've all been using our own printers, our own equipment. We've all been buying our own equipment, almost subsidizing our companies. Actually, it's probably people haven't really realized that yet. But so how do you see the office? Yeah, well, yeah, it's a good question. I have to think about that. How do you see the office evolving, sort of post-COVID?
Yeah, look, I think the office is not a static place, and it really never has been a static place. And you've seen the office evolve over the decades, right? I mean, even I spent some time in Silicon Valley. Even in Silicon Valley, right? Like, everybody took down the offices and had these low-level cubicles, foosball tables, and everything else. And then people started complaining about all the noise from the low-height cubicles, right? So, I mean, we had to actually bring in these phone booths at Netflix that, people could go in and be quiet so they could get work done. So the office is constantly evolving, and there's no question that the pandemic has changed the way we work. And I don't know about you, Steve, but I'm in the office today in part because I miss the office. Like, I miss this dedicated place that I go to work. And at home, I feel like, well, maybe I should throw a load of laundry in and do this work between the, like, you don't have the sort of uninterrupted focus.
Demarcation as well, isn't it, between work and personal space? You end up working forever.
Exactly. My husband's always like, I don't even see you. You go into that little room and then you come out at 6 p.m. looking for dinner. And I'm just like, okay, that doesn't make me sound great. And now everyone's going to hear this on this. But
well, you're not alone. You're not alone.
I know we're all surviving this, but I do think we think the office is going to be around. It's no doubt that it will change again, right? So I think maybe the setups will change. In fact, all these open spaces that everyone decided was the way we should all work will not be so open anymore, because actually we have to make sure that the virus isn't spreading, and people want a little more protective area. And frankly, most of us have always wanted a place to go put our thinking caps on and do the work and not be distracted. There's probably going to be more flexibility in, that balance, as we talked about earlier, between how many days you work at home, how many days you're in the office. When you go to the office, is it more of a social event and you go in for your big meetings and collaboration sessions, but other days you work from home? I'm not sure how different that's going to be honest with you, because people were doing that before. We just all did it en masse now. And maybe
there's no point going back if everyone's just going to be on Zoom calls, is there? Because you got to make the time. So yeah. All right. Look, to finish, was the one thing in this process, one anecdote you can share, where you thought, yeah, this is what I was aiming for. This is what we were aiming for. This is what the new structure should look like and is delivering on.
Yeah, I mean, I really do think it was back in sort of late March, early April, when the pandemic hit. We had to change our entire marketing and communications plans for the year. We had a new campaign that we were about to roll out that didn't seem timely anymore. We had to shift, like so many other companies did in the beginning, to how are we supporting people in the field. Most people don't realize that the healthcare industry is still incredibly reliant on printers. So we were airlifting printers into field hospitals, the Javits Center in New York and other places, so that we could support those frontline workers, banks, supermarkets, all those places that had to remain open because they were essential, we were supporting. So we had to flip on a dime and have a completely different plan for this year. And it was really in that moment that it wasn't just me, but like the entire team like felt like the glue had stuck, right? Like we were able to kind of move fast, get with our sales team and our businesses to quickly understand, okay, what are the key things we're going to focus on? Here they are. We're laddering up to these. We'll be rolling them out in, succession over the next, weeks and months, and launch that Make Now Work campaign, which really, it sort of anthropomorphized the word now, because now was what we were all dealing with, and now was going to be more important than then, or the future. So we moved really quickly. That campaign came together in 8 weeks, and I got to credit our partner, creative agency Code and Theory, for working so quickly and closely with us to get that out the door. But we started that effort in April, and it was launched in early June.
Yeah, I think that's another thing that will persist afterwards, but as will coffee breaks, hopefully. But this one's over, I'm afraid. So thanks, Anne-Marie, for explaining that. Great to chat to you, and continued good luck with blowing things up.
Thank you.